Hi everyone. What follows this brief little introduction is an edited version of the Fall 2024 preview show that aired yesterday on Twitch. I've edited it a little bit for length. I've also cut out the very middle interlude section, which is a kind of off-script version of what I do. And if you really want, you can go watch it at Twitch. The link for the VOD will be below. Otherwise, please enjoy. Hi. Thanks for joining me for the Fall 2024 preview show. This is our 22nd preview show, and with any luck, it's going to be the last one that has this boring layout and the broken chat highlighter. As many of you know, I've long at last returned to YouTube. Some of the design changes over there I intend to propagate to here. I'm saving towards one more piece of hardware, and then I will begin the overhaul. On the matter of YouTube, starting next Monday, not tomorrow, but next Monday, I will be bringing back Casual Monday, the weekly show that primarily is about covering a variety of currently airing anime, but will probably frequently have little extra sections as well. You can find something of a write-up in the Discord about plans in that direction. There was never going to be like a great jumping in point for that concept, so I wanted to at least put it after the preview show, since the Casual Monday will have full spoilers for whatever it is that is under discussion. So, on that note, this is the deal with the preview show, if you have never been here before. This is a roundup of some of the newly airing full-length shows for this anime season, which basically means no shorts, no sequels. While the banner down there says that spoilers are forbidden, I mean that for the audience. Please share opinions, but not details. I will be giving a spoiler-light introduction to each work, what I think of as premise spoilers, along with some initial thoughts and some clips that I select to try to give an impression of the work and tie into what I'm saying about it. A lot of the work that goes into my script is figuring out how little I can give away and still give you a usable impression of the show to help you decide if it's something you might want to check out, or something you'd want to vote on to receive a dedicated channel in the Discord. And by the way, the voting for that will end on this coming Tuesday in the seasonal watch app. I always put that in the wrong place. Here, that'll end on Tuesday. Also, except in the case of double premieres, which I'll note, all of the information and impressions I share today will come solely from each work's first episode. I haven't watched any further for any of the works today, even though several are already up to episode 3. And on that note, I am not going to be talking about Uzumaki, because it actually finishes airing today, so you will shortly be able to read or watch people's impression of the entire thing. And lastly, this is not a roundup where I give, ratings or rankings. I don't score these. They aren't in any kind of sorting by quality. The order of the show is about the flow I want for the stream rather than a reflection of any merit that they possess or lack. Now, due to the work to get back to YouTube and the constraints of my new job, today's preview show will be a little bit truncated compared to our average. I have used the aforementioned seasonal watchlist app as my guide to today's lineup, choosing the works that were most selected as planning to watch by the community at large. So if something you were curious about is absent, these are our 16 scripted portions, and we do have a brief interlude in the middle where I have an off-script portion. Now, I usually like to find some kind of commonality between shows in a season. Even if I really have to reach for it, I am a sucker for a little theming. And this time it was easy, because while I always thought of summer as wedding season, apparently it's fall. We're going to start with 5 shows that all have prospective marriages or engagements as their inciting events. 2 are old-school pick-your-bride arranged marriages. 1 features a deceptive groom. 1 features a deceptive bride. And in 1, the marriage itself is the deceit. 5 anime on weddings. Not a single one features 2 people who just love each other and want to get married. At least, when the story begins. Dun dun dun. From that list, we are going to begin with Nina, the Starry Bride. So, Nina, the fake bride. I'm going to greatly abbreviate the setup for this one, and focus more on the dynamic that is likely for the series as a whole. So, our title character, Nina, is a street kid, orphaned by a great plague 5 years previous, and fighting to survive with a few other kids ever since. It's a rough life, but that's how it goes. The star you were born under determines whether you are poor or rich. Fate is written in the stars. She has an additional problem, though. She has deep blue, lapis lazuli eyes, extremely rare, and is thus a possible target for slavers. So she pretends to be a boy and hides her eyes, but a day comes when it is not precaution enough. The men who take her end up being part of the royal family, in particular second prince Azure, who has some striking golden eyes himself. And they do so because they have a problem. The princess priestess Alicia has died in an accident, and she has been promised to another nation in an arranged marriage. She also had the lapis lazuli eyes. In fact, because of that feature, she'd actually been tapped to be a star princess, as those are the same eyes of the god of stars who governs fate. Thus, the real Alicia was raised in relative isolation, and so it can just find someone with similar looks that can perhaps prevent the impending diplomatic disaster. They just have to turn the street kid into a passable princess, somehow, and keep everybody else fooled in the process. This is Prince Azure's task. He has 3 months to pull it off. And Nina is quite rough around the edges, and not exactly thrilled about the whole idea anyway, but others will suffer if she's found out, and she really likes the idea of mattering to someone, and so at least the scheme is not dead on arrival. There are some added complications, such as a power struggle between the prince and the current queen, with Nina there as the point of contention, and there's other court intrigue hinted at, and so on. So the conflict is not solely about making Nina into Alicia, a convincing substitute goldfish. The dynamic between her and Azure seems to be the main thing, though, for while he is trying to refine her rough edges, she seems to be somewhat blunting his sharper ones. Now, if this was not tension enough, the very first scene is a flash forward, implying that Azure is about to order Nina's execution, while all she can think about is that she wants him to look at her one last time. And now, as is frequently the case, and will be the case today, the one scene that best sells this setup is not one I want to spoil by sharing it here. It is enough to say that it helps turn some of the bleakness of our premise into something more hopeful, and our two leads into people that we are more ready to root for. It does have its moments of tonal dissonance. Its ideas are not yet complex, save that promise of the flash forward. This series was the lowest in the whole community app of things that I'm talking about today, but it does have some overlap in premise and dynamic with a few series that people have enjoyed in the past, like enjoyed enough to earn Discord channels, so it might be worth giving it the once-over on that line. Ranma 1/2. Now, Ranma 1/2 is a remake of a series that I only know by reputation. I have nothing to compare it against, but I have long known what its hook is. That has pretty wide cultural diffusion, and so I am going to share it here because I think it'd be very hard to understand the setup otherwise. Now, this one goes in our little wedding setup section because the inciting event is two fathers playing matchmaker with their children. One has a son, Ranma. He's bringing over from China to meet the Tendo family, which only has daughters. 3, in fact. Their daughter's intent is for one of them to marry Ranma and have him continue the legacy of their family dojo. The girls understandably object, especially the youngest sister, Akane, who really doesn't like boys at all. She's also the only one we see actually training and practicing martial arts, and whatever it is she's doing, it's working. Meanwhile, across town, after a rainstorm, a pink-haired girl engages in a fierce street fight with a panda. The girl is in an argument with said panda, despite its inability to speak, saying that it can't decide for her who she'll marry and that she's going back to China. Well, that sounds familiar, but it seems like some details aren't quite adding up. The panda prevails, though, and when the two show up at the Tendo dojo, only one conclusion makes sense. This girl is Ranma, and that is in fact how she introduces herself. The father is crushed, and the girl is elated. Akane especially, who takes Ranma on a tour. She knows they were in China training and wants to spar with Ranma. And whatever it is they were doing in China was definitely working, because it is a one-sided affair. Having worked up a sweat, Ranma is offered the bath as guest, and that's when it falls apart, because while a short pink-haired girl entered, a tall, dark-haired boy emerges. After the understandable hijinks and confusion, an explanation eventually comes out. This is also Ranma, and he and his father were recently cursed, a curse whose activation and deactivation depend upon water temperature. The rain they were caught in earlier transformed them, and so they showed up in cursed form, and the hot bath turned them back. I'm not sure why the chosen course of action was to just show up transformed, but it's made a mess of things. In theory, the marriage plot is back on, but with a really confusing complication, and after getting off on the wrong foot. None of the four characters, or the four children I should say, even want to play along, but for the moment, the two fathers seem to care only for the dojo's future, and I guess the story's future too, because we don't have anything else if everybody makes reasonable choices. Now, even though this is a remake, it is not a modernization. Alright, it is still set explicitly in the Tokyo of the 1980s, and the character designs at least invoke a previous era, especially those iconic hairstyles. It is also heavy on the slapstick. Characters make irrational decisions because it's funnier that way. Despite this, I found myself pretty entertained. There doesn't seem to be some attempt to alter these older anime tropes, rather they are indulged and then executed with intention. I guess my impression is that it felt more classic than dated, if that makes sense. But your mileage may vary, especially if there is any nostalgia for the original that you have to contend with. Tying the Knot with an Amagami Sister. I've put this one immediately after Ranma 1/2 because it has such an amusingly similar inciting event. A guy brought in to marry one of three sisters in order to continue a legacy. It's a shrine instead of a dojo, and the guy is an orphan rather than someone coerced by a parent. But the real difference, at least for the premiere, is that while the audience can infer from the title and the prologue, the actual four characters don't know that's the scheme until the very end of the episode. Now, our point of view character is the guy, Uryu, and his understanding is that he's been invited to stay at the Amagami shrine while he studies for admittance to medical school there in Kyoto. He muses that it might be blasphemous for him to do so, considering he doesn't believe in gods. No one answers him when he arrives, and thinking the old priest might be hard of hearing, he investigates inside. And then, a surprise, he hears girls' voices, and the discussion means they are changing clothes. Whew, good thing I didn't open that door. I would have been labeled a creepy creeper-peeper. Unfortunately for Uru, they are also capable of opening doors. Apparently we have moved away from the old lucky pervert trope to shows that invoke and then subvert it, and now to the next phase, where we pretend to subvert it and then just show it anyway. Progress. Anyway, after shutting the door and then re-emerging, all three are dressed as Mikos, and each has a distinct reaction to his presence. In contrast to Ranma 1/2, this work does a lot more to flesh out all three sisters, if still a little bit unevenly. There is the older sister, Yae, who both matronly and childish, who wants him to treat her like an older sister. The youngest, Asahi, the mischievous one, who wants him to treat her like a younger sister. And the middle, Yuna, fiery and forthright, who wants him to shut up and die. Well, not her exact words, but definitely her exact sentiment. There is apparently some rule that one sister in these situations must always be strongly opposed to the newcomer. None of them knew he was coming, he didn't know anyone else would be here, and the old priest isn't even around to mediate. Now, while this isn't the end of the premiere trotting out the trope classics, the second part of the episode bends a different direction. Although the sisters have distinct personality, all three are united in their genuine enthusiasm for their role as shrine priestesses. It's not a sense of duty, either. They are devoted to the gods and to their visitors, to a belief in the potential of miracles. They also have in common red cords, these gifts from their late mother, that each wears knotted in their hair, thus giving us another link to the title of Tying the Knot, as well as invoking the old red string of fate. But Uru is there to study to get into medical school. He's a man of science and finds the idea of gods and miracles, well, bunk. And he doesn't mind saying as much. The friction between them isn't just a difference of believing or not believing in the supernatural either. When one of those precious red cords goes missing, they intend to trust to the gods that it will be found, while he insists that you make wishes come true with your own effort. And that conflict of perspective is what plays out over the rest of the episode, which I'm just not going to spell out. I will say, though, that it makes it seem like this is the thematic ground that the series as a whole is going to cover. That it's not so much an arranged marriage rom-com as it is using that setup as the vehicle to tug on this tension between belief and action, between tangible and intangible. Both he, as an aspiring physician, and they, as shrine maidens, believe in the value of helping other people, but they start from very different places about what that should look like. Now, it certainly has a sentimental streak to it, and is being a bit oblique about how it will treat the idea of the supernatural, since there are moments where spiritual matters are earnest, and moments where they are the punchline. I'll say that while the beginning of this seemed like something I would write off, it developed into something more interesting for its future direction, and we haven't even gotten to see how Uru will react to the idea of marrying into a shrine, nor the sisters to the idea of marrying him. Alright, so next up, 365 days to the wedding. We are centered around a busy travel agency, and especially around two people who work there. Ohara, the man, who has been there 4 years, and due to being a step behind in how he responds to others, believes his coworkers think of him as a slacker, or unreliable, and in truth, he feels like he's a step behind in his life as well. Honjoji, the woman, has been there 5 years, and has a habit of staring at others in a way that makes them uncomfortable, and so the rest appear to give her a wide berth. They are thus both a little invisible in the hectic workplace, and they feel even more invisible than that. The inciting event is an all-hands meeting to talk about the company's future. In an effort to expand their market in North America, they're opening a branch in Anchorage, Alaska, and someone from this office will be tapped to be its branch manager. No one leaps at the chance to volunteer, and so they're told that they will pick someone when the time comes, 365 days from now. But since it's such a big move, they will prioritize a worker without family. One of them basically jokes about getting married to avoid the transfer, and they all laugh at the absurdity of that idea. Our two focal characters, though, feel like they absolutely cannot go. Ohara has a pet cat he rescued that only recently opened up to him, and he feels he cannot abandon it. He seems to have few friends in general, and parting with his pet he finds unacceptable. Honjoji basically doesn't like going out of her comfort zone at all. She loves maps, loves to pore over them and imagine herself in points distant, but does not actually want to travel afar. Staying inside with atlases is her idea of a good time. They happen upon each other one day, and Ohara says he's going to quit the company, explaining about the cat, to which she proposes they get married. And she doesn't mean it as a joke. She's very formal and methodical about social interactions. I think might be supposed to read her as autistic, and she presents to him her plan. Neither of them stand out much at work, and so if they announce they're getting married, few people will care. And then they just have to wait out any interest for a few months to get themselves disqualified, let it fizzle out. After that, they can explain or just pretend it never happened. It's her plan. She says she'll take care of everything, and they will both be safe. She tells the branch manager, asks her to keep it quiet, assumes all is well, but woefully underestimates human nature. Especially the branch manager, who ends up being just a delight of a character. They are definitely not going to be able to fly under the radar on this, and now have to figure out how to make a convincing case that they're a couple of engaged lovebirds, rather than socially challenged strangers. An aspect I like a lot about the presentation is that we get split time with both leads. We hear both sets of thoughts. They have different hurdles when it comes to their predicament. They have different ideas about what it does or doesn't mean, or who bears responsibility, and different ideas about how they are perceived. And so by eavesdropping on their inner workings, we can appreciate the extra layer of difficulty for them right now. But maybe in the future, that lets us appreciate what I assume will be an extra layer of success. Indeed, this premiere seems to directly foreshadow a future payoff. while also setting up the narrative clock of the 365-day countdown inside the office, the marathon of deception that they now have no choice but to keep up. This episode goes long enough for us to get a few examples of how difficult that's going to be. But it is also the most effective part, because their characters really come through when they are put into situations they find desperate. I, at least, come off really endeared to their messy, awkward efforts, and hard-pressed to root for their fake marriage to remain fake. Alright, and for the last of the wedding bells, Yakuza Fiance. Now, I found it difficult to decide how much to tell you about this one, since it really only presents the complete picture right in the very last few minutes. And then that, plus the end credits immediately after, probably either sells you hard or doesn't at all, so I think I'd do you a disservice to simply summarize it. But I also decided that some vague notion that the plan doesn't go to plan also is unhelpful, because it would make this seem like a generic arranged marriage conflict, and oh boy, it is not that at all. So I will give you a little more than I want to, and also stop short of the complete setup, which might be the worst of the three options, but it's what we're going with. Now, as the title suggests, we have a story involving Yakuza and at least some kind of engagement. In this case, it's a pair of meddling grandfathers, each head of a Yakuza group in their respective area, and we begin with our high school girl Yoshino learning about a proposed engagement from her grandfather. She's almost 17, has never been with a boy, so he found her a boy. The also high school age Miyama, in fact, and her grandfather sends her to Tokyo to meet him. For all his disarming qualities, Gramps is still a Yakuza, and Yoshino seems like she's had little agency and little experience with anything but terrible men, and so she goes along with it, fearing the worst. Miyama, though, strikes her as a perfectly nice, normal person. And even though there is no guarantee that she was going to accept, that she would stay around, they went to the trouble to make her a private space on the compound, arranged for her to attend the same high school. Now, their schoolmates, they know that he is the grandson of a Yakuza head, but he seems to be pretty popular, and Yoshino arriving with him in the morning, well, it earns her no love from some of the girls. She is flashy from their point of view, and unsavory rumors begin to spread pretty much immediately. The saving grace is that he seems so gracious, but there are odd moments when, well, something else seems to poke out. Increasingly, she has reason to worry that he's not such a nice, normal high school boy, until a moment where it is rather undeniable. And indeed, both had the wrong idea about the other. He was hoping she was a spoiled, self-indulgent type, the kind of girl that would ruin his life for a bit, something tempestuous and wild. Basically, she's too good of a person. He has no use for her, and, well, he has a whole conversation that is brutally demeaning and frightening, and you'll just have to see it for yourself. But when she speaks to her grandfather, she is told 1 year. 1 year she must put up with whatever is said to her, deal with however she is ostracized. And a few more instructions that I'm not going to spill here, except to say that it lights a fire under her. The story going forward, then, I sum up as thus. Don't get mad. Get even. Now, like I said, the full picture is only clear right at the end, so it's difficult to guess what these subsequent episodes look like. But if it delivers on half of the panache of the credit sequences, then I'd be well pleased, because it looks like a high-style gangster noir with fiery personalities and a femme fatale as the actual lead instead of as an antagonist, while, also somehow still being high schoolers. It is an anime. Now, getting out of marriage, but perhaps not out of romance, Blue Box. Blue Box is a sports anime. Blue Box is a romance anime. Or maybe it's one with elements of the other. Or maybe it'll be split down the middle. They all seem equally likely after one episode, so I have no idea. What I do know is that it's really charming, and a rare popular girl, unpopular guy setup where I like both characters right out of the gate, literally from their first scene. A lot of the episode involves school sports in a sense, and yet it is absent most of these sports anime staples. There is no sequence explaining some part of a sport for the audience's benefit. There is no plot around trying to get someone to join this or that sports club. No tragic past event that had caused someone to quit a sport they once played. There's no example games or scrimmages. Even the sports are split, as the female lead plays basketball and the male lead plays badminton. What the sports are, instead, are a vector for the leads to demonstrate their determination in chasing a dream, as well as a metaphor for the likelihood thereof. And on the second point, our narrator MC, Taiki, is crushing hard on a girl named Chinatsu, the rising star of the girls' basketball team. Taiki is somewhat less accomplished, and his teammate helpfully gives the analogy that Chinatsu is like a seeded team in a tournament, while Taiki is the kind which gets knocked out in the first round. But his nicely characterizing reply to that is that it's fun to play against a powerhouse school. Their one real point of contact is the early morning free period, and no matter how hard he tries to be the first one there, she has always arrived first, always practicing. At least until others wander in, they are alone, though he has seemingly done very little with this opportunity. In fact, his seeming ineptitude and self-consciousness are half the engine of its comedy. Now, they attend a private school that is big on sports. They have this huge gymnasium where it seems like every sport practices at the same time. It's a chaotic scene. And so for her to be a star in this environment means that she is indeed a rather unreachable goal. As it happens, that both are characterized as working hard gives him chances, as her being the first to arrive and sometimes last to leave means he'll have organic opportunities to approach. In fact, the episode is structured around these momentary bits of contact, until one comes where his awkward earnestness ceases to be a liability. And honestly, it's rare that I have my emotions yanked in so many different directions as the back third of this one manages. I'm not even mad, but I'm definitely not telling you why that is. To add a few more things about this one, it really picks its moments to go for dramatic visuals, but it sure is lovely when it does so. The opening credits play relatively early, and they too have about a 20 minute, that'd be long credits, a 20-second sequence that is some of the prettiest work I saw. But watching said credits, what I actually wrote in my notes was that I already love this pink-haired girl, so she better be in the premiere. And she was! Hina is her name, and she was all I hoped for, including being the other half of the humor. Impish childhood friend who herself performs yet a third sport, trolling Taiki. And I guess gymnastics or something else, I don't know. We only get to see her practice her true passion of riling up the MC. And while I know childhood friend might set off some alarm bells, nothing in this premiere at least suggests love trial shenanigans. Once the setup complete, there are shenanigans aplenty as it is, so perhaps we are safe on that front. Though I confess, looking at the key visual gives me a little more doubt on that than I had from the episode. Ultimately, I do love me some earnest characters, so I am rooting for this one to keep up the high standard that it has set out for itself. A negative, positive angler. I couldn't decide which word could fit because they wouldn't all three fit, so, this is what we get. Now, the dissonance of that title is well matched by that of the opening episode, which begins with deadly serious subjects, but centers on a low-key pastime, and has moments of both slapstick humor and subtle introspection. To wit, we are following a guy named Tsunehiro Sasaki, and finding him in a bad way. We kind of have to build the picture ourselves, but scads of neglected trash, piled up mail, graphics of plunging financials, economics textbooks, it points us in the likely direction. He moans, however, nothing he has tried works out, and we see him prepare to hang himself. This too does not work out the way he intends. Good news, though, he'll learn he has terminal brain cancer, so in 2 years, the problem takes care of itself. In what is perhaps the best proof of his depression, this revelation doesn't shake up his routine at all, and he still wastes his time in pachinko parlors, until some past decisions catch up to him. It seems he borrowed money from some less reputable sources to pursue whatever the original goal was, and they have come to shake him down. Thus, in an amusing bit of fish theming, he is pursued by lone sharks in bits that are more amusing than threatening. In the process, though, he will fall into the water, and he finds himself unable to fight the current. He is rescued by a group of fishing hobbyists who are on their way to fish off of a breakwater, way out in, I think, a bay. Which means that he is stuck there with them until morning. They are an eclectic bunch, almost exaggeratedly so, especially for what Tsunehiro believes to be a dad hobby. With little else to do, he does eventually allow himself to be coaxed into trying a little lure fishing. As one girl says, how do you know it won't change your life if you won't try it? He feels a little differently. There's a little direction given to him, which is really a way of giving it to us, and he plays along for a bit. Well, if it's going to change his life, it sure won't do it in a hurry. What about this is even supposed to be fun? While he nearly provokes an existential crisis for one of them when they need some time to answer, he does get lots of little slices of the answer from all of the different crewmates. Or the other anglers, I should say. Now, this almost ends as just another day of misadventure, but there's a series of surprises that unfold over the last few minutes. And one of them is probably what sells me on the whole concept, but it's such a subtle thing that I don't want to ruin it by describing it to you. In fact, Tsunehiro's general skepticism was about where I was until that point, when an innocuous bit of instruction is injected with a little gravitas when related to the series' opening minutes. If that is what we get more of, sharp by contrast with all the more exaggerated sequences, then we might have something really nice on our hands. Though, I confess, it will take a bit for me to not get tripped up by some very odd character designs, especially against the great care taken with the environments. Like, I'm kind of a sucker for nautical trappings, and the renderings of everything waterside is delightful. In several aspects, then, balance is going to be the hard part for this work to pull off its concept. Suicide and terminal cancer are weighty things, and while the low stakes of hobby fishing are a nice balance, slapstick-like routines need a more deft touch to be an effective counterpoint. But it's an anime original, and I always like giving originals a chance to win me over. Now, Orb, On the Movements of Earth, had a double premiere, like some of the others that we will talk about later, but I actually only watched one. One was enough to know that I want to eat whatever it is they are intending to serve. You might say it is worthy of pondering. Orb is quasi-historical fiction, but is not about the intrigue of a political dynasty or far-reaching warfare, expeditions through frontier lands, or any of the kinds of events whose melodrama is baked in. But for now, at least, it is about astronomy, the pursuit thereof, and the pushback against. Astronomy as a subject is fascinating to plenty of people, but it's observational. The actual doing of astronomy is some of the most sedate science there is. So how do you spin out compelling human conflict with this as your focal subject? This seemed to be an uphill battle to me, and so I found their answer all the more impressive. In brief, this is set in a rendering of medieval Europe with the names chiseled off, but rather obviously meant to invoke at the time when the church was clamping down on scientific research that they saw as a threat. Part of the episode is spent building up the picture of this oppression, between a diabolical opening narration, public burnings of heretics, and a brutally tense torture scene. And while it always feels really weird to say things like, that was a great torture scene, that was a great torture scene. Intermixed into all this, we meet Raphael, a young prodigy who is attending school among his, less gifted peers. He was an orphan taken in by the headmaster, and he has survived by living his life rationally, avoiding wasteful desires, and seemingly by acting in ways that impress others. In his mind, he thinks this a world of fools, and he performs a role meant to make him come off as dignified, humble, and capable. A path towards a life of comfort. As such, he declares that he will be studying theology, the highest academic field, when he is allowed into university in the near future. And his headmaster/guardian praises this, but later points out that he will therefore cease his hobby of astronomy to focus on theology instead. It is clear that this will be difficult for Raphael, though he knows himself that it is not rational of him to be so interested in the stars. He is then tasked with picking up an old acquaintance of the headmaster's, a man who was declared a heretic and is now being released into his custody, having recanted. This is Hubert, a man huge and yet gnarled, staff in face, imposing despite being one who walks with a cane. If you were to take the concept of gravitas and give it human shape, you would get something like Hubert, a scholar archetype in somewhat short supply in anime at large. He at least sees plainly through all Raphael's posturing for favor, and then, when discovering that Raphael has a keen eye and mind when it comes to the stars, he is determined to make him assist his research. For, recanted or not, a scholar is a scholar, and he will not cease his quest for truth. What I liked about the presentation, at least for this episode, is in a rendering of subjects in opposition as forces with their own quality, instead of having human representatives fulfill that role. That is, it's not astronomy battling the church for supremacy, where one character is science guy and another is church guy, and they oppose one another directly. Instead, the logical pursuit of the universe's truth is presented as something powerful and beautiful and forceful in itself. It is suffused with grandeur and allure such that we might understand why scholars would risk much in its service. And the church's authoritarian hold is not present in a single individual, but is rendered as part of an ever-present and oppressive atmosphere. From the intentional dissonance of the church bells and the score, the blackness of shadows poking around the edges of most scenes, to the casual ease of cruelty and squalor in what we see around the city. The church's domain of the earth seems ugly and dirty, while the heavens are beautiful and pure. It is a dramatization of the ideas in opposition, not only that of the people who profess those ideas. The premiere is bookended by compelling scenes that both show vastly different means to pursue truth, and that choice of structure is itself a decision that makes me highly optimistic about where this one will go. And we will begin with the stories of girls who couldn't be magicians. Now, there is an argument to be made that the only real metric by which you should judge a piece of art is in how well it accomplishes its intention. If one were to use that metric, the stories of girls who couldn't be magicians would be slotted somewhere among the very top of today's list. A storybook whimsy, that seems to be its guiding aesthetic, and oh boy does every element support it. Color palette, character design, architecture, clothing, hairstyle, even the level of detail. There's even like a paper-like texture that is put across the entire prologue and all of the backgrounds to help sell the impression that you are not so much watching an anime, but an illustrated fairy tale that happens to move. And a colorful work deserves a colorful cast, starting with our protagonist, Kurumi. As prologue, we see a sequence in her childhood where she was excited about an astronomical event, tried her hand at a little weather charm in hopes of bringing clear skies, and was crushed when it rained instead. Yeah, you should have paid attention to the title there, Kurumi. But when a bright light draws her outside anyway, she discovers a real magician who gives a dazzling, whimsical display of spellcasting to clear the skies. She sees Kurumi. They talk about magic for a bit, with Kurumi deciding she wants to grow up to learn to use it. She is then given a little green notebook, told to keep it until the day she becomes a magician that our mystery woman will be waiting. When we get to the present, she has already failed utterly. Okay, so it's not a storybook in every sense. Specifically, she's gained admittance to Reteran Academy of Magic, but did not make... Oh, back up a second. Academy of Magic, but did not make the cut to be in the Magic program, only the Standard program. And it will become clear very quickly that the Magic program, with its students known as Megumi, is slightly more important to the school than those plebes over in the non-Magic track. In fact, it's almost worse, getting into the school and watching others get to live their dream while she just gets normal schooling. Kurumi wears her emotions on her sleeves. She's assigned an energetic and optimistic roommate named Maki, who basically corrals her through all the opening and disappointment and oscillating motivation. Now, this is a Magical Academy kind of story. We have a large cast of classmates that I'm just not going to go through. Suffice to say that we get little introductions to several existing dynamics and story seeds that undoubtedly play out alongside Kurumi's own. In fact, there are quite a few other people who seem like they should have gotten into the magical course, but are in the standard course instead. And while we may think that they have stayed on because they might be able to learn magic by proximity, it's not that simple, as only the Megumi students are allowed to possess the tools by which these magicians usually cast spells, these things which are basically magical pocket calculators that assist the complex process of drawing and using magical arrays. Anyway, there's some day one festivities, matriculation ceremonies, unexpected turns, such as a demonstration that goes awry, the introduction of an antagonistic student who has it out for Kurumi for some reason, and a last-minute substitute for their homeroom teacher. By the end, it is clear that Kurumi's school life will play out far differently than she expected at the beginning. Overall, this was cute. The characters under focus in the episode get sufficient time for us to form usable impressions so that we can appreciate their interactions, and the dedication to injecting everything with a colorful eccentricism makes this work stand out even among other Magical Academy types of anime. Magic is portrayed as something joyful and wondrous, rather than something that is cool or powerful. It's a bedtime story kind of magic school, not the summer blockbuster type. Because it is so strongly committed to this vision, then, its appeal is reliant on whether you buy into that as well. But I think so long as its particular flavor is to your liking, I do not think you're going to lack for execution. Magilumiere, Magical Girls Incorporated. Now, putting it next to Girls Who Can't Become Magicians, because while both are about magically inclined girls, the two styles would struggle to be any further apart. Magilumiere, Magical Girls Incorporated looks like what would happen if humanity had not come up with the concept of magic until the present day. Everything exudes high-tech and behaves like programming. The magical girls ride on brooms that are actually basically hover bikes, and even the action seems less like Maho Shoujo and more just like urban fantasy. In fact, even the transformation sequences seem more like some kind of cyberpunk avatar being applied, like a skin you might buy in a cash shop to dress up your character, or something similar. 2, the way magical girls work in this world. It's a public service, as magical girls are called in to eliminate creatures called Kai. As such, the girls are well paid and popular, public stars, and they're employees of corporations. We are told at the beginning of this that there are 500 different magical girl companies, and from what we can see, they operate almost like supernatural paramedics, responding to calls and so forth. In fact, it's hard to tell if there's any actual magic involved, so much does everything seem to have a technological veneer. We follow 2 girls for the opening. One is Koshigaya, a current magical girl for the Magilumiere company. She is high energy, hot-headed, and ends-focused, don't sweat the details type. The other is Kana, who is basically her opposite, and a good chunk of the episode is watching her repeatedly try and fail to find a job. Kana is a consummate researcher with amazing recall, but we see this turning out to be a liability for some of the interview process. Finally, a subsequent interview is the site of one of these Kai attacks, and Koshigaya is the responding magical girl, and thus do their paths cross. The episode as a whole had some highs and lows, which I think are easily which are easily encapsulated by the two fights which kind of bookend it. All right, so I kind of want to show those to you, a little bit of those, so you understand what I mean. The opening fight runs on the rule of cool. All right, it's a high-octane, high-spectacle affair, seems to balance on a knife edge, with scant explanation, and it kind of demands that we make sense of what's going on as it happens. The second fight is none of that. The need to add Kana and make a case for why she is useful slows the action down to a crawl, unless you somehow think exposition is action. And I guess it strikes me that this bodes rather poorly for the future, because having her research and memory skills portrayed as an asset necessarily means spelling out what she brings to the table rather than just showing it. Things need to happen in a certain way, too, so the risk of contrivance seems especially high. For example, there is this coffeehouse scene that is supposed to be a show-don't-tell way of getting across her powers of memory, but considering how it's handled, I wish they had just told me. Maybe once well integrated, this ceases to be a concern. Maybe when we meet the rest of the employees. I don't know. I mean, I hope so, because a kind of techno maho shoujo could be a really neat concept, but the demonstration of adding Kana to the team is the opposite. But if you do like fun in your magical girl stories, luckily there is Acro Trip. Acro Trip is another 2-episode launch, and a good thing, because it's the second that really sells this one. Which is helpful for me, too, since it means I can share all the way to the end of the first episode, where we first glimpse the shape of what's to come. Now, we are following a girl named Chizuko, who is staying with her grandpa in a little seaside town while their family moves. Apparently, her mother gets transferred a lot, and Chizuko is used to this. Has become somewhat disaffected, unbothered by the moves because she doesn't really put down roots anyway. We get a few hints that she probably has spent a lot of time alone and is a rather sober child, which is stated plainly. While she thinks at first that her grandpa's little town of Nanaga is just a sleepy little village, she soon learns that it has an unusual situation when she experiences her first kaijin alert and witnesses a fight between some kind of bear-themed villain and Berry Blossom, a bona fide magical girl. And for the first time, Chizuko is truly animated. She will, upon seeing this magical girl, she immediately asks if, well, can she just live here from now on? Ceasing the constant moves, as Nanaga has something that she can't find anywhere else. Once moved and transferred, the pattern presents itself. Our bear villain is a guy named Chrome, member of Fossa Magna, and he constantly does battle with Berry Blossom. This is a regular enough occurrence that her classmates just find the kaijin's alerts to just be a bother, but for her, she sees each as an opportunity, and she rushes to the site of each one if she can. On one such instance, she witnesses footage of the fight instead, and is underwhelmed. In truth, Chrome is hardly a mastermind. She can't help but complain out loud about how lame his attempts, how flawed his strategies. And overhearing, even encouraging her evaluation, is Chrome himself. They end up having coffee, with Chrome giving a little history. He, too, loves Berry Blossom, or maybe more specifically, he loves being on the receiving end of her punishment, especially when she has to dig deep to win the day, and he prompts Chizuko to admit that she, too, likes it better when their contests are more evenly matched. As she'll say, I know the city's safety is on the line, but it's more hype when she's having a hard fight. So his proposal: join the Fossa Magna Council, help him come up with, okay-ish plans that will challenge Berry Blossom, give them both what they want. Chizuko doesn't want to go down the path of evil, but Chrome is set on figuring out how to convince, coerce, or trick her into doing so. This continues into the second episode, and is where the series' sense of humor gets to stretch its legs a little more. Chrome also proves to be savvy at times, not just always incompetent, and so now it's a real mystery scene to scene as to whether he is helpless or just feigning as much to get what he wants. Now, especially adding the second episode, I found this to be a pretty amusing mix of surreal elements and madcap humor. There is a nice personality to its simplified designs, and it seems like it thrives off of unbalanced character dynamics. Having the main character be such an amusing blend of reluctance and enthusiasm makes it easy to root for her to succeed and for her to fail, depending. There's cute, low-stakes humor, a show having fun with a magical girl and rival contest, in a city dotted with quirkiness. What's not to love? TsuMasho is about the Nijima family, father Keisuke, daughter Mai, and mother Take, who is 10 years old. And no, it's not the story that sentence would ordinarily imply. Basically, we open with a series of vignettes to show Keisuke and Take, who are adults, I want to stress, meeting, dating, marrying, having a daughter, and then parting. She dies unexpectedly. The remaining family are a shell of their former selves, seemingly trapped in stasis for 10 years, until a little girl rings their doorbell to proclaim that she is Take, their former wife and mother reincarnated. She convinces them with information only she could know, explains that she only recently regained these memories, and then basically busts their chops for falling apart without her. You better not have been eating convenience store food for 10 years. And what the crap are you doing with your life? This is all rather emotionally confusing for everyone involved. And Take, I've struggled with her name. Take is not going to be able to just pick up where she left off. She's the daughter of another family now. Though she does start making and bringing bentos for him on odd days, something he always loved and was part of how they bonded originally. They start spending time together, which has its own perils, as Keisuke can't seem to get it out of his head that he can't call a child his wife in public. This was also a double premiere, and the second episode flips over to let us see more about what Take, her situation is and her family, and it's fairly bleak. And it's clear it's going to be a problem if it's discovered that she is spending all this time with some family that by all rights should have no connection to her. But that is all the details I want to share on that. Now, on paper, this is a neat concept, because there's an opportunity here to tell a story about grief, about moving on after hardship, how one's family affects oneself or the loss of family, for good and bad. I suspect that this does not simply go that they get to be reunited and all is as they wish, and thus some difficult, complex conversations surely must be ahead. But the thing as a whole lacks a certain sharpness, a certain liveliness. Take herself is the bright spot. She is downright spicy as her younger self, and she is the one experiencing inner conflict and struggling to figure out the right thing to do. The others are just flat, and by contrast. Mai has hardly shown any personality at all, and Keisuke is such a caricature of the helpless husband trope that he's difficult to root for. We have a situation where she worries and gives, and they just take with little reflection. I feel like this could be what it addresses in the future, that they let themselves be fully dependent on her, and they thus fail to develop like they should have. But that might just be me projecting what I think the story should be. Across 2 episodes, there isn't any indication that it will actually move in that direction. I just have to assume it does something of the sort, for while there are moments where it's touching, it's ultimately kind of vacuous if it ends up being something pasting over adult fear with this kind of wish fulfillment. Like, I think it's telling that my worry isn't the whole conceit about having a 10-year-old wife. Anyway, moving on to You Are Ms. Servant. As its English title, that is what we go with around here. Now, I had no sense of what this work was going to be, and even partway through the premiere, I was still kind of unsure. And as it turns out, setting out expectations and veering away from them is part of the pattern of the episode, sometimes to make it lighter, sometimes to make it heavier. This uncertainty is shared by the non-title character, Hitoyoshi Yokiya, a first-year high schooler who is home alone for summer vacation. And being a teen without supervision, he has apparently let his rather nice house go to seed, sleeping in bags of trash around the place. And then his doorbell rings, and of all things, there is a girl in maid attire asking if she could be hired to work here. Seemingly because he doesn't know what else to do, he invites her in and asks her some questions. And he has the intent to just send her on. And in the course of this asking, discovers that her work history isn't so much domestic tidiness as it is underworld assassination. She's that kind of maid. But her demeanor is so muted, demure, and almost bashfully straightforward that it's hard to square. She's so earnest that he half thinks it's a bit and so keeps reacting, but he also half thinks that she's a killer and he probably shouldn't upset her. Turns out she really is superlatively skilled with knives, and is in fact passionate about them, proud of her excellence. Her manner is such that this ends up being an endearing quirk rather than the red flag of a psychopath. She's apparently recommended there by her former master, though neither of them have any idea why. Our high schooler, well, he doesn't really need anyone assassinated, and so he was sent her on her way. But we don't have an anime in that case, so after a part that I will skip past, he will decide better of it, just give her a go, and as you saw, the place does need some help cleaning. But even this is just a well for humor, as she assumes talks of cleaning and such are just code speak for nefarious tasks, and then when it's actual cleaning, she is, well, woefully inexperienced. She is somehow impossibly athletic, but also impossibly clumsy, and even manages to be both in one scene. Now, I'm going to leave off here on any more specifics from what happens. What I want to say is the impressive thing about this episode to me is its control of tone. The fact that she used to kill people is a source of humor in some scenes, and a source of heartbreaking pathos in others, but they're crafted in such a way that we don't experience dissonance. Even the title joins this game. Ms. Servant is how they are translating what he decides to call her, which is Meido-san. And ordinarily, calling someone by their role instead of a personal name is a heartless, dehumanizing thing. But within the context of the episode, it is something else. It should be dissonant, but it isn't. And that kind of interplay in the tone and the things this episode does is how it builds up to its heartwarming crescendo from just a very unusual starting point. And both of them are in a situation they do not know how to navigate, and since we can hear their thoughts, we can judge the authenticity of what they do or say, and know also what they don't say. I'm unsure how many other characters will be involved, but these two, at least, seem dogged by sorrow or loneliness, and their meeting seems like a first step towards something better. It certainly goes in for the sentimental, right? Like, make no mistake, but I still want to cheer them on. She's a killer who I just want to pat on the head and tell her it'll be okay, and he is a convincingly unsophisticated teen who isn't the least bit obnoxious. So I am low-key eager to see how this one plays out. Next up is I'll Become a Villainess Who Goes Down in History. So I had to pick at least one Villainess anime to keep the streak alive, and I chose this one. And that's it. It definitely uses the isekai world based on an otome game formula, with our protagonist someone who didn't care for the heroine and only had eyes for the villainess. And sometimes dreams do come true, as she is reincarnated as Alicia, the very same villainess she admired. She regains her former life memories at age 7, and has a change in attitude immediately noticeable to those around her. Which is hardly surprising on its own, but it's not a situation where she goes from being a spoiled terror to someone kind, but from someone lazy and capricious to someone consumed with determination. You see, while a lot of reincarnated villainess types focus on trying to prevent sharing the same fate as the game characters by leading away from the behavior, Alicia is all in. There's no time for her to persist as an undisciplined child if she's going to be the greatest villainess in history. She'll ask her brothers for instructions in swordplay, although they demand that she prove she means it by giving her exercise homework. she can keep that up for a week, well, then they'll teach her, which she not only does, but has rapid, impossible growth in strength and endurance. While waiting on the week timeout, she thinks she'll try to learn about magic, spend some time in the library, and though she doesn't discover magical tomes, she does discover that she can read and absorb information at what is, again, an impossible pace. Now, a week's end, she'll go to demand her lessons and discover they are being visited by all the conquerable routes in the game, who, like her, are not yet the age they will be during the Otomi's events. Her brother is actually one of them as well, they being one of the 5 great noble families who are masters of the main types of magic. More to the point, she sees this as an opportunity to make her first impression as a villainess. Now, while she certainly does manage to make an impression, it's probably not the one she intended, as the Crown Prince, one of the people visiting, acquires an obvious liking for her, and becomes a frequent visitor in the upcoming year. Now, the rest of the episode is about setting the stage for the story ahead, which involves a scene that indicates the king himself has heard about Alicia and taken some interest in her, one that sets the starting point for the game itself, a prophecy about a saint being found who will join the prince in shaping the nation's future. That's the game's heroine, and we don't meet them, but Alicia is eager for the day when the two of them will come into conflict. I honestly would not be surprised if we just time skip right to the game setting next episode. Now, unfortunately, I feel like the hook is the best part of this one. That of a villainess who really wants the job. Despite some of the ways in which she is precociously sophisticated and advanced, her idea of what it means to be a villainess is kind of childlike in its simplicity. And that dichotomy, that's what I imagine is going to drive the humor. But what's lacking so far for this kind of story is good character dynamics. And the opener is quite sparse on this point. Alicia is a solo act for like half the episode. But it may be that it's simply awaiting in the inevitable time skip to their game age and the game setting. I'd have to see what it's like then to know if I would be interested in any more, frankly. You know, the villainess model that has really worked for me in the past pretty much thrived off its character interplay. Like it lived or died by it. And there was just nothing noteworthy about that in this opener. All right. Let this grieving soul retire. It's definitely not here near the end to double as as the point at which I'm starting to get very tired in the preview show. All right, so let this grieving soul retire. I'm going to talk about the setup on this one as a whole, rather than go through the way it is presented in story order. The focal character for this, the grieving soul who wants to retire, he is the head of a clan of treasure hunters called First Steps. Clans appear to be associations of adventuring parties, and these parties venture into treasure vaults all around the world to collect the relics inside to great fame and glory. His party, Grieving Souls, colloquially known as the Grievers, founded this clan long ago and are renowned as one of the top parties in the capital. The clan is holding an open house recruitment, attracting solo hunters from all over, and the adventuring job fair and its aftermath is pretty much what comprises the bulk of the episode. The hook here is that this is basically Imposter Syndrome, the anime. Grieving Souls was a party of 6 childhood friends, and while the other 5 were supremely talented, he was simply ordinary, and even tried to leave them at one point out of fear that he held them back, but they would never tell him so. And the way that goes is that they decide to make him the leader instead, which ends up making him the leader of the eventual clan, and their legend precedes them. Thus, everyone assumes that his decisions are wise and his counsel valuable. We, however, get to hear all his thoughts, and they tell a very different story. He doesn't even want any of this, but he basically keeps failing upwards. He has one particularly go-to tactic. I like to imagine that he once flipped open a book on leadership, read something about how a great leader knows how to delegate, and decided that was all he needed. He is constantly foisting decisions or undertakings onto other people. For the example we get, rather than judge the assembled applicants on a merit that he knows he can't discern, he creates a free-for-all with a promise that the winner will get his recommendation. The ensuing melee causes destruction enough that he will be called in and censured by the Regional Explorers Association, and must select a Batsu game punishment quest, the things that no one wants to do. And this, too, he assigns to some young go-getters. Apparently he has a habit of doing so, but it seems the others interpret this as handing out quests to push them to the edge, to hone them into better hunters, and so on. Now, we do meet a variety of other treasure hunters, both the hopeful applicants and some well-established stars. But the real standout to mention is Tino, a girl with a mad crush on our MC. She basically carries the episode on her shoulders, and by shoulders, I mean her painstakingly rendered lower half that never strays far from the camera's gaze. It's the kind of blatant voyeurism that tips over into comedic. Appropriate because Let This Grieving Soul Retire is comedy, even if it masquerades as something else at first. And as a comedy is where it shines, with great timing, subversions, sight gags, and a wealth of humorous reactions. I'd guessed Portino to be the star and victim of about half of them too. Crushing on a guy who delegates any and everything is going to be a very trying road ahead. And I am here for it. So Dan, as I understand it, there's a special 3-episode movie event for this ahead of the season, which was the first 3 episodes stitched together into one story. However, now that actual serialization has begun, it is weekly single releases, so I am just talking about episode 1 here. Now, this show almost immediately got a channel in our Discord with our instant approval rules, and it is hardly surprising. We've proven to be rather fond of the stuff that comes out of Science Saru. We followed Keep Your Hands Off Eizouken week to week back when it aired. We had streams discussing Heike Story and Scott Pilgrim Takes Off in their respective seasons. We have watched Night is Short, Walk On Girl, Tatami Time Machine Blues, and Inu-Oh across our 2 film festivals. Something consistent across the pretty distinct works that I just listed is that their animation is not a simulacrum of reality. I mean, it's animation. You can do wildly stylistic and gestural representations of reality instead. You can do things that wouldn't work in almost any other medium, distorting motion and form and color to suit your artistic vision. You can be expressive in many directions, clamp it back into simplifications, whichever one best communicates the ideas you value in the voice you desire. And at least from one episode, Dan lives up to this legacy, though I am, unfortunately, holding back some of the better examples for spoiler reasons. Now, our setup involves 2 schoolmates crossing paths, but we begin with Momo, a popular girl who is getting dumped by her first boyfriend. Though, from his 40 seconds on screen, this honestly seems no great loss to us. Not a good pick, but she was with him because he looked like a young Ken Takakura, a Japanese actor who frequently portrayed brooding stoic types. Sadly, this one had the style but not the substance, and her friends think she's silly anyway, since there aren't guys like that anymore. She'll be pacing in her frustration when she passes a classroom where some boys are tormenting a meek, glasses-clad fellow in the back. And then what I wanted to do for you, but the audio is screwed up, is to just play what happens next. So, sorry, no audio. And the reason I play that, even without the audio, is because that's the point in this episode where I thought to myself, oh yeah, they cookin'. No words, just simple perspective control, unmistakable characterization. Momo was a firecracker in her little breakup scene, awkwardly blustering in front of her friends, restless energy as she paces thereafter, and then says nothing, and then in deadly calm, when she puts the kibitz on the bullying. In every single one of those scenes, she dominates the space. She has presence. The person she saves, though, has basically negative presence. She'll flip through what he's reading for a moment, I think just as an excuse to linger a moment to cool the bullying, but he takes that as a secret interest in its subject matter, and will somehow square himself up to come talk to her about his favorite topic, UFOs and UAPs and anything related to the occult. She doesn't believe in any of that. She is skeptical and even dismissive of his passion, and even maybe a little cruel, before thinking better of it. As an olive branch, she offers that she does believe in ghosts, and now it's his turn to be patronizing. And then it's just an all-out brawl. A wager it is, then. If they can come up with proof of the existence of ghosts or aliens, then the loser has to do the other's bidding. Now, how this wager is carried out comprises the bulk of the episode. Each of them goes to a location rumored to contain evidence of the phenomena that they are skeptical of, her to a school where alien abductions supposedly occur, and him to a haunted tunnel. And they call one another during these simultaneous missions that are half evidence gathering, half tests of courage. Speaking via phone instead of in person and outside the familiar school setting, they are way better at talking to each other rather than talking at the other, and they share some personal things about why they care about these particular subjects. And then, well, it turns out rumors come from somewhere, but the details of that I leave to you. Of course, the part I'm leaving out is probably what is most memorable and excitable about the episode. I'll mention, though, this episode leads with its opening credits, and they make an effective introduction indeed. They're highly stylized, but you can still discern that the series will involve a supernatural soup, mixing things like the aliens and ghosts of our wager that are usually distinct kinds of stories. Thus, in the part after what I've discussed, we also get a mix of sci-fi and horror tropes, especially ones revolving around sexual agency and body horror. And it strikes me that its elements of genre mashup are a case of choosing the right tool for the job, rather than just throwing everything against the wall to see what sticks. Said OP also promises an even more colorful cast to come, and if their introductions are just half as good as these two, then we are surely in for a real treat. And the clips I showed were relatively sedate, I know, even if the characters were frequently not. But most of the last half of this episode is downright vivacious in its energy, direction, and especially in its use of color. Like man, if you're going to give anything else a close read today, go pay attention to the color and lighting in that second half. When it turns it up for effect, when it pulls it back, how it uses hues the same way that a composer uses motifs. At some point it ceased to matter whether or not I bought into its premise. I just wanted them to keep injecting that straight into my veins. And so, I'm glad that we've now arrived at the end of the preview show, because I know which series' next two episodes I'm about to watch.